Memorial Day in the small town of Braddock, Pennsylvania, was a solemn event, honoring the fallen soldiers of wars past. This year, a new addition to the town's memorial caught everyone's attention: a granite monument engraved with the names of local heroes who had never returned home. Among them was Private Samuel Hargrove, a World War II soldier whose body had never been recovered. The townsfolk gathered for the dedication ceremony, unaware of the dark secret that would soon be revealed. As the mayor concluded his speech and the band played a somber tune, a chilling breeze swept through the crowd. It was then that Old Man Whitley, the town historian, noticed something odd. The granite seemed to shimmer in the fading sunlight, casting an eerie glow. That night, Whitley, driven by curiosity, returned to the memorial with a flashlight. As he shone the light on the monument, he heard a faint whisper, "Help me." He froze, the flashlight trembling in his hand. The whisper grew louder, echoing through the night air. Whitley backed away, his heart pounding, but the voice persisted. Unable to shake the experience, Whitley visited the local archives the next day. He discovered that Private Hargrove had been declared missing in action after a botched mission in the dense forests of Germany. Determined to uncover the truth, Whitley ventured into the woods where Hargrove had been last seen. The deeper he went, the colder it became. As twilight descended, Whitley stumbled upon an old, abandoned bunker. The entrance was overgrown with vines, but he managed to pry it open. Inside, he found a decaying, blood-stained journal. The last entry read, "Trapped, no escape. The voices, they're coming for me." Suddenly, the bunker door slammed shut. Whitley's flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. He heard footsteps, then whispers, growing louder and more insistent. "Help me. Join us." Panic set in as the temperature dropped further, his breath visible in the cold air. He felt a hand grip his shoulder. Whitley felt the icy grip tighten on his shoulder, and a cold voice whispered in his ear, "Help us." He spun around, but there was no one there. The darkness seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. He fumbled for his flashlight, his fingers numb, and managed to turn it back on. The weak beam revealed skeletal remains strewn across the bunker floor, too many to be just one man. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the flashlight again. In the pitch black, the whispers grew into a chorus of tormented cries. "Help us. Find peace." Desperate, Whitley remembered the journal. He frantically searched his pockets for a lighter, finally managing to ignite a small flame. By its flickering light, he read more of the journal. The entries detailed a horrific ordeal. Private Hargrove and his comrades had been trapped in the bunker, ambushed by enemy forces. Unable to escape, they had slowly succumbed to starvation and madness. In their final hours, Hargrove had recorded their desperate attempts to signal for help, their descent into insanity, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal and abandonment. Whitley's mind raced. How could he help these lost souls find peace? He recalled stories of haunted places where spirits were freed by finding proper burials or by having their stories told. Clutching the journal, he vowed to bring their plight to light and ensure they received the honors they deserved. As he made his way back to the bunker entrance, the whispers faded into a mournful silence. The door creaked open, and Whitley stumbled out into the cold night air, vowing to return with a team to recover the remains and give the soldiers a proper burial. But as he looked back, he saw a figure standing in the bunker doorway, Private Hargrove, his spectral form nodding in solemn gratitude. Months after Whitley's encounter in the bunker, he returned to Braddock with a team of archaeologists and forensic experts. News of his discovery had spread, and the community eagerly awaited the excavation, hoping to finally bring their lost heroes home. The team carefully unearthed the remains and documented every fragment, ensuring that each soldier would be identified and honored properly. During the excavation, they found more journals and personal items, each telling a story of bravery and despair. The townsfolk were deeply moved, and a large memorial service was planned. As the remains were laid to rest in the town's cemetery, The air seemed to lighten, as if a great weight had been lifted from Braddock. However, Whitley couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. One night, he awoke to the sound of footsteps outside his house. He peered out the window and saw Private Hargrove standing in his yard, his spectral form glowing softly in the moonlight. Whitley grabbed his coat and rushed outside. "Hargrove, what's wrong?" "We found you. We gave you all a proper burial," Whitley said, his breath visible in the chilly night air. Hargrove's eyes were filled with sorrow. "You found us, but not all of us. There are more, forgotten in the woods. You must find them." The next day, Whitley organized another search party. They scoured the woods, following Hargrove's spectral guidance. Deep in the forest, they discovered another bunker, even more decrepit than the first. Inside, they found more remains, along with a disturbing sight: crude, makeshift coffins, as if the soldiers had tried to bury their own in their final desperate hours. The realization hit Whitley hard. These men had not only fought for their country, but had also fought against despair, trying to honor their fallen comrades even in death. The additional remains were brought back and interred with the others. Only then did Whitley see Hargrove one last time, his face peaceful. "Thank you," Hargrove whispered, before vanishing into the night. With all the soldiers finally at rest, the town of Braddock felt a renewed sense of peace. Whitley documented the entire ordeal, ensuring that future generations would remember the true cost of war and the importance of honoring those who sacrificed everything. But even in peace, the whispers of the past lingered, reminding all who listened of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Years passed, and Whitley continued to dedicate his life to uncovering and honoring the stories of forgotten soldiers. His work had transformed Braddock into a place of remembrance and respect. The town's annual Memorial Day ceremony had grown into a major event, drawing visitors from across the country. One Memorial Day, as the town gathered at the newly expanded memorial site, Whitley felt a familiar chill in the air. He had come to recognize it as the presence of the spirits he had helped. The ceremony began with a solemn reading of names, followed by the laying of wreaths. As the last notes of taps echoed through the still air, Whitley noticed a faint glow near the edge of the crowd. There stood Private Samuel Hargrove, his spectral form more solid than ever before. Beside him were the other soldiers whose remains had been found in the bunkers. They stood in silent salute, their faces serene. Hargrove stepped forward, his eyes meeting Whitley's. "We are at peace now, thanks to you," he said, his voice echoing softly. "You have honored us in life and in death. We can now rest." The crowd, oblivious to the ghostly presence, continued with their ceremony. Whitley felt a profound sense of closure as he watched the soldiers fade into the light, their spirits finally at rest. The weight of their suffering lifted from the town, leaving behind a sense of peace and reverence. From that day on, Whitley knew that the spirits of the fallen soldiers were no longer trapped by their past. They had found their way home, and Braddock would forever honor their memory, ensuring that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Every Memorial Day weekend, the Stevenson family would go camping at Lake Vanish, a secluded spot in the heart of the Rockies. The lake was named for its mysterious history of disappearances, but the Stevensons had never experienced anything out of the ordinary until one fateful year. It began with their arrival. The usually serene campsite was eerily silent, the only sound being the rustling leaves. As they set up camp, young Billy Stevenson wandered off, drawn by a distant, melodious humming. He followed the sound to the water's edge, where he saw a figure standing in the lake, waist deep in the water. "Billy," his mother called, breaking his trance. He turned to see her approaching, and when he looked back, the figure had vanished. Shaken, he ran back to the campfire, but didn't mention the figure to anyone. That night, as the family slept, Billy was awakened by the same humming. It was closer now, resonating just outside his tent. Peeking out, he saw the figure again, this time standing at the edge of the campsite, its face obscured by shadows. Billy blinked, and the figure was gone, The next morning, he confided in his older sister, Sarah, about what he had seen. Skeptical but curious, Sarah agreed to keep watch that night. As darkness fell, the family sat around the campfire, telling stories and roasting marshmallows. Suddenly, the humming started again, faint but unmistakable. Sarah's eyes darted around, trying to pinpoint the source. Then, she saw it. A pale, translucent figure hovering near the tree line. It looked like a man in old-fashioned clothing, his eyes hollow and his mouth moving as if singing. She grabbed her father's flashlight and shone it toward the figure, but it disappeared the moment the light touched it. The family decided to pack up and leave the next morning, but the night's horrors were far from over. As they prepared to sleep, the humming grew louder, more insistent, surrounding the campsite. Tents rustled, shadows danced, and the temperature plummeted. The air grew thick with an oppressive presence, and whispers echoed in the dark. "Join us, join us!" Billy and Sarah huddled together, terrified, as the figures emerged from the shadows, their faces now clear, soldiers from different eras, all with the same hollow eyes. They moved closer, the humming turning into a haunting chant. The Stevensons realized too late that Lake Vanish held more than water. It held the spirits of those who had disappeared, forever lost, forever seeking company in their watery grave. The horrors that awaited both Whitley and the Stevensons were far from over. The mysteries of the past and the restless spirits of the fallen had only begun to reveal their true, sinister nature. The Stevensons huddled in terror as the ghostly soldiers encircled their campsite, their hollow eyes fixed on the family. The chanting grew louder, filling the air with an oppressive weight. Billy clutched his sister's hand, his mind racing for a way to escape this nightmare. Suddenly, Sarah remembered a story she had read about the lake's history. It was said that during the Civil War, soldiers had camped by the lake and vanished without a trace, their spirits doomed to wander the area in search of peace. She whispered this to her parents, who listened in growing horror. Mr. Stevenson, trying to remain calm, suggested they try to communicate with the spirits. He stood up, his voice shaking but firm. "We're here to honor the fallen, not to disturb you. Please tell us how we can help you find peace." For a moment, the chanting stopped. The ghostly figures paused, their hollow eyes flickering with something that might have been recognition. One of the soldiers, a young man with a tattered uniform, stepped forward. His voice, though ethereal, was clear. "We are lost, betrayed. Help us return home." Mrs. Stevenson, her voice trembling, asked, "How can we do that?" The soldier pointed towards the lake. "In the depths our remains lie forgotten. Bring us home, and we will rest." Understanding dawned on the family. They would have to recover the soldiers' remains from the lake. With renewed determination, they waited for dawn. The spirits lingered, watching silently as the family planned their next move. At first light, the Stevensons launched their boat onto the still waters of Lake Vanish. Guided by the spirits, they reached a secluded spot where the water seemed unnaturally dark. Diving into the depths, Mr. Stevenson discovered a mass grave of skeletal remains, tangled in rotting uniforms and rusting weapons. With great care, they began to recover the remains, bringing them to shore. As they worked, the ghostly soldiers watched, their expressions slowly softening. By the time the last bone was retrieved, the sun was setting. The family held a small impromptu ceremony, vowing to ensure the soldiers received a proper burial. As night fell, the ghostly figures began to fade. The young soldier who had spoken earlier approached Billy, his form now almost translucent. "Thank you," he whispered. "We can rest now." With that, the spirits dissolved into the night, leaving the Stevensons alone by the lake. The family returned to town with the remains, ensuring the fallen soldiers were finally laid to rest with full honors. The story of their ordeal spread, and Lake Vanish became a place of reverence rather than fear. But every Memorial Day, the Stevensons returned to the lake, paying their respects and remembering the night they helped the lost soldiers find peace. The darkness that once enveloped the woods and the lake had lifted, but the memories of those haunted nights would forever linger in the minds of Whitley and the Stevenson family. The spirits had found peace, but the eerie echoes of their past would never be forgotten. Years after the Stevensons' harrowing experience at Lake Vanish, the story of the phantom soldiers became local legend. The lake, once avoided by campers, now drew curious visitors intrigued by tales of the supernatural. The Stevensons had ensured that the soldiers were remembered, but the lake still held a mysterious aura. One Memorial Day weekend, a group of college students decided to camp at Lake Vanish, eager to test their courage against the supposed hauntings. Among them was Megan, a history major fascinated by the Civil War. She had read about the Stevenson story and was determined to experience the paranormal for herself. As night fell, the group gathered around the campfire, sharing ghost stories and daring each other to explore the woods. Megan, armed with a notebook and a flashlight, ventured to the water's edge, hoping to encounter the spirits. She waited in the stillness, listening for the haunting hum that the Stevensons had described. Hours passed with no sign of the ghosts. Disappointed, Megan turned to head back to camp when she heard it. A soft, melodious humming. She spun around and saw the faint outline of a soldier standing in the lake, just as Billy had years before. Heart pounding, she approached the figure. "Who are you?" she whispered. The soldier's face was pale and sorrowful. "I am Lieutenant James Crawford. I am lost, separated from my unit. Help me find them." Megan's curiosity outweighed her fear. "How can I help?" Crawford gestured toward the far side of the lake. "There is a hidden cave. Inside you'll find what you seek." Megan hurried back to her friends, urging them to join her in exploring the cave. Reluctantly, they agreed, driven by a mix of fear and excitement. The group trekked around the lake, guided by Crawford's ghostly figure, until they reached a narrow, concealed entrance to a cave. Inside, they found remnants of an old camp, rusted canteens, torn uniforms, and skeletal remains. Megan felt a chill as she realized these were soldiers who had never been found. The atmosphere grew heavy as the students carefully documented the site, determined to bring the story to light. Suddenly, the cave grew cold, and the humming filled the air. The ghostly soldiers appeared, their forms more solid than ever before. Lieutenant Crawford stepped forward, his eyes pleading. "Help us find peace." Megan understood. "We will. We'll make sure you're remembered." The group worked tirelessly, ensuring that the remains were recovered and given a proper burial. The story of the lost soldiers of Lake Vanish was finally told, their bravery and suffering honored at last. The lake, once a place of fear, became a site of reverence and remembrance. But every Memorial Day, as the sun sets and the air grows still, the faint hum of the lost soldiers can still be heard, a gentle reminder of the past and the lingering echoes of those who sacrificed everything for their country. Megan and her friends had become local heroes after uncovering the hidden cave at Lake Vanish. The remains of the soldiers were identified and given a proper burial, and a new monument was erected at the lake, dedicated to the memory of those who had vanished during the Civil War. The lake, once a place of fear and mystery, had become a site of pilgrimage for history enthusiasts and those seeking to honor the past. The Stevenson story was now part of local lore, and the town held annual memorial services at the lake, where the community gathered to remember and reflect. One particularly quiet Memorial Day evening, Megan decided to return to the lake alone, seeking a moment of solitude and reflection. As she sat by the water's edge, she heard the familiar, soft humming. Looking up, she saw Lieutenant James Crawford standing in the moonlight, his form faint but recognizable. "Thank you, Megan," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You have helped us find peace." Megan nodded, tears in her eyes. "It was an honor, Lieutenant." Crawford smiled. "Our stories are now known, and we can rest. Remember us, but do not mourn us. We are at peace." As he faded away, Megan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The spirits of Lake Vanish had finally found their way home. their stories etched into the annals of history. The lake, now a symbol of remembrance and peace, would forever be a place where the living and the dead could connect, honoring the sacrifices of those who had come before. The sun set over Lake Vanish, casting a golden glow over the water. The air was still, and for the first time in decades, the lake felt truly at peace. The echoes of the past had been silenced, their stories told, and the spirits had found their rest. Megan stood up, feeling the weight of history settle gently around her shoulders, and walked back to town, knowing that the memory of the fallen would live on, honored and remembered, every Memorial Day.